Well, welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self-acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have a performance and prosperity specialist out of Mildura, Victoria, Australia. His name is Neville Starick. He teaches professionals and business owners how to develop their self-awareness so that they can create and experience their own version of prosperity. He talks to business groups every week on the topic of well-being and the hallmarks of a prosperous life. Neville, I just want to introduce you to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's good to be here.
Likewise. And I love that I've been connected with a lot of people from Australia because you guys are usually a day ahead of me. And whatever it's my afternoon, it's your mornings.
Yes, it's a 17-hour difference at the moment, and that's not too bad. It's actually relatively easy to navigate. But yeah, the time zone thing is
Yeah.
challenging. So
Well,
yes,
thanks again for jumping on the podcast today. I wanted to open it up as we get started for you to tell listeners just a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background.
thanks, Chris. As Chris mentioned, my name is Neville Starick. I'm the performance and prosperity strategist, and what I'm doing is sorry, you'll have to edit this.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. Hi, as Chris said, I'm Neville from Signature Counseling and Coaching. I am the personal prosperity and performance strategist, and I work with people to find their way through significant life change. I talk about prosperity in terms of a quality of life and not about finance and wealth, although that is another component I don't deal with. But yes, so I'm all about creating a prosperous life. I've got a background where I've grown up as a third culture kid, and that means that I've lived in a number of different countries in a number of different places, and I've also changed careers a few times before settling into the counselling space. So yeah, there's lots of transition, lots of change, and the lot of those things that I've learned about over the course of my reflections and my studies have indicated that lots of changes like the ones that I've gone through have a lot of grief attached.
I found it really fascinating when you and I first met because I have never heard the term third culture kid before. And I was very intrigued by that because it was a new perspective and a different experience of the world that I think a lot of people may or may not have experienced before. So I was really excited to have you on my podcast to talk about the grief that's associated with that. Here in the States, the closest thing I can relate to that in a sense is when I did talk to a lot of military families in our country. They do what's called PCSing, which just in the short layman terms of thing just means you're moving from one state to the other or one country to another.
Yep.
And oftentimes it's within like a 6 month or year window. So it's very short time periods of
Yep.
massive change that go on. I'm really excited for you to tell us a little bit more about that experience that you had in your life of that third culture kid culture that you went through and just about the grief that you went through on that journey.
Yeah, basically the third culture kid, like military children that grow up in a military family would generally fall into that category, particularly if they've moved around a lot. And basically what's happening for a third culture kid is that they're spending some or all of their formative years from 0 to 18 outside of the culture that their parents grew up in. And that has implications because you've got this heritage of I come from a particular place, but I've got a lived experience of living somewhere that's not from where my family originated. And so you're sitting there with this contrast of things. People who are not third culture kids, basically their lived experience of culture, their lived cultural experience and their culture of heritage are overlapping pretty well, almost completely. With a third culture kid, that overlap is a lot smaller. So basically what they're doing is they're navigating multiple sets of rules and multiple sets of expectations about what it is to be in this place versus this place. So, and of course, in my particular case, my parents were missionaries in Papua New Guinea, and there was going to be a time where we were going to leave the mission field and return to the home culture. And that was something that, as a third culture kid, you see all the time, is that people are coming and going. The locals stay, but you as a third culture kid kind of know that, hey, this is a temporary space. And then you go back to your home culture because you see that happen so many times. My situation is a little bit more complicated because my parents are from two different countries to begin with. So I've got my mother is from the US, my father is from Australia, and so I was split between the lived experience culture in Papua New Guinea, the culture of my mother in the US, and the culture of my father in Australia. And so it's like I'm supposed to be a part of all of them, but I don't really fit in any one of them. So there's some massive implications there for identity and for a sense of belonging, and and also where you fit. So when my family left the mission field when I was 9, we came to Australia. At that point, my father was the only one who'd ever lived in Australia. So the rest of the family had visited Australia, but we'd never lived in Australia. So my siblings and I, my mother, we were not very familiar with the cultures. There was a period of massive adjustment for us because it's like, okay, this is the place that we're going to settle, but we don't know it. And because at that stage, most of us, except for my father, had very strong American accents that sort of marked us out as being very different. And so it was kind of like, how do we fit into this place when everybody recognizes that we're actually a foreigner? So there was that had some challenges that we had to work through, and one of the things that happened, like with kids, I mean, one of the things there's a certain stage of development where kids are really wanting to fit in. They don't want to be so different that they're separate from their peers, and I wasn't any exception. There was a case of yeah, how do I adapt? How do I fit in? And so things kind of got lost. Like the accent changed, the terminology, you picked up the terminology of the local area. You just got to know what it was that how things worked in that particular space. And we had, I mean, that the first 4 years that we were in Australia, we moved like a few times. So by the time I was by the time I was 13, um, we had changed schools. I think I'd been two primary schools and then two high schools, and it was just kind of like, and I mean, the high school system was different from what we were used to as well. So it's like all of that was different. We changed states twice. We'd lived in about four different houses in that 4 year window. So there was a lot of upheaval going on and sort of like uprooting. And while some of the moves weren't very, very big, they had changed. They imposed some changes on the way that we did stuff. And so there was this constant adaptation that was going on, which was quite challenging, and didn't realize the implication of it until we got to the last house that we lived in, where I ended up finishing high school. And I had reached a point where it's just like, I am so tired of being uprooted and having to form new friendships again, and having to disconnect from a past place and reconnect with the place that I'm not familiar with. And I sort of reached a point where I'm done. I really withdrew into myself in a lot of ways, where it was just like, I don't want to connect with people deeply, because my experience has been that I'm going to lose them. We're going to move again. So there was that kind of a response. So I became quite aloof, quite reserved. I still engaged with a lot of things in my school, but really didn't form a lot of very deep friendships because of the fear of losing them. And yeah, so there was that was going on in the background. So yeah, so the third culture kid experience, as I said, is about navigating multiple cultures. And so we left New Guinea, came to Australia, have a heritage that's also connected to the US. And then it's like, well, who am I? Am I Australian? Am I American? Am I somehow a Papua New Guinean? Um, but all of those things were part of me, and not one of them dominated. And the people around me, wherever I was, were wanting to know, like, where are you from? And I couldn't answer that question because it's like, and that is also a very typical third culture kid response, where it's just like, where are you from is very complicated now. You've got lived experience in many places sometimes, or lived experience, significant lived experience in one particular culture, and now you're in another culture that you're supposed to know.
I
And
remember
you
you
got, but
describing how hard that was with one of
yeah,
your family members. I think it was an uncle or somebody that you met at a family gathering that
yes,
asked
yes,
you that question, said, "Where are you from?" And you're like, "I don't know how to answer that because I've
yeah.
been all over the place."
And it's so, I mean, the list is like, instead of the where you from question, I was throwing out, it's like, are you wanting to know where I was born? Are you wanting to know where I've lived as a child? Are you wanting to know where I'm currently living? Are you wanting to know where I have lived as an adult? There was a different answer for each one of those questions. So it was just like, it wasn't simple. And people who don't come from a third culture kid background don't get that. By the same token, me coming from a third culture kid background, I find it very difficult to understand people who have lived in the same place for most of their life and who've grown up in the same house, who have had the same neighborhood, the same school, or just the typical schools that were in their area. I didn't have that. So it's kind of like, how do I connect with that experience? So there is a little bit of a disconnect there. Where the grief comes in is around the things that you have to leave behind. So it's kind of like, it's not that somebody died, but you've suddenly lost a place that has significant memories for you. You lose connections with people. And even though in this day and age we've got lots of ability to stay in contact, it's not the same as when you're actually living in the same locality with someone. And you lose seeing how their lives unfold to a degree. You lose the relationships, you lose the places, you lose a whole bunch of things. I know for me, because of the upheaval that went on the first 4 years after we came to Australia, as I said, I shut down a lot. I basically locked away all the memories that I had of my childhood in New Guinea. Well, we talked about it a bit in our family. We had slight nights and we remembered and reminisced as a family periodically. But that became less and less as the years went by. And it was kind of like, that was then. I'm just sort of shutting it away. I'm not going to not going to spend any time reflecting on that because there was some pain involved. There was a lot of loss around uh, home, and a loss around relationships, and a sense of safety that had disappeared, because in Papua New Guinea I knew how things worked, whereas here in Australia I was struggling. And there were things that people expected me to know that I didn't know. And there were things that I knew that nobody was interested in because it came from somewhere else. So there was a whole bunch of responses that went on with that. So what was interesting for me was years later, when I was in my 30s, I encountered the concept of the third culture kid, which I didn't know about at that point. And suddenly a whole bunch of things made sense about how I tend to connect with people, what my expectations are of life, how the experience of the wider world had shaped my perspectives of where my specific locality was, and how do I interpret what's going on, and the recognition that this is not the only way to do life was really big. So, but a little bit later in my 30s, I had the opportunity to go to Africa, and it's funny because I'd never been to Africa before. I had a friend there that I was going to visit, who was finishing up a term of mission work in the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, And I expected Africa to be really different. What I didn't expect was how much reminded me of my childhood. So I was seeing plants that I recalled from when I was in Papua New Guinea. The people reminded me of the New Guineans. They weren't exactly the same, but they were similar. There were things about the landscape that were familiar, even though I'd never been there. The way that the houses were built were not exactly the same as in New Guinea, but they were reminiscent enough that I was making connections in lots of ways, and I didn't expect that. And what really got me was that when I left the Congo, I had only been there for 2 weeks, but I left the Congo and I was looking out the plane window and I was suddenly realizing I was really sad. And I go, this is really weird. It's like, I've only been here 2 weeks. Why should I be so strongly connected to this place? Got back to Australia and I had everybody go, how was Africa? How was Africa? And I could not talk about it. It was like, I didn't have any idea what had happened, but there was something in there that it was just like, I've got no words for what my experience of Africa was about. And it took me about 3 weeks before I could even begin to look at the photos and start to talk about it. And by that stage, people had moved on. So it was just like, it wasn't, people didn't particularly want to hear about it, which was kind of okay for me. But there was this whole sense of like, what is this about? And when I was unpacking that myself with my spiritual director and with my supervisor, my counseling supervisor, what came out of it was that the experience of going to Africa reconnected me with those memories of my childhood that I had locked away. And it connected me with a lot of really positive memories. It didn't connect me so much with the leaving, but it connected me with a whole bunch of things that I didn't know that I'd actually remembered and valued. And along with that was the sense of like Papua New Guinea was the last place where I had actually felt like I belonged. And all my experiences going after that had been an attempt to try and find a way to fit in, which I'd never felt I'd been particularly successful with that. So here was the sadness was about what I'd left behind in Papua New Guinea in my childhood that we'd never had an opportunity to really explore because my family was in upheaval for 4 years. And then the challenging circumstances for basically the rest of my schooling. It was never something we discussed. We remembered, but we never discussed how we felt about leaving Papua New Guinea. And it was not until I came across this concept of the third culture kid and started talking to my family that it came out that all of us had struggled with the transition, but nobody knew that anybody else was struggling. So it was fascinating.
Well, I think you hit on a big topic about grief that happens in every aspect of grief, which is when we don't talk about it, when we don't create awareness or hold space for grief, it's going
Yep.
to come out somehow, some way. And I find it fascinating that you took a trip to Africa. You've never been there before, know nothing about that place. Go to Africa, and all of a sudden it just unloads itself out there and really
Mm.
just throws it at you. And you're going, "Whoa, where did
Yep.
this come from?"
Yep.
It must have felt like a blindside hit to
Um,
experience that.
it wasn't. It was a bit of a blindside hit. It wasn't the hardest part of it was that I didn't know. I didn't know exactly what I was dealing with. I kind of figured that there was grief, but I didn't know what I was grieving. And that was interesting. I mean, a lot of people seem to think that grief is about a death, and so you don't normally associate grief with other things. But grief, as I've discovered, it connects with so many other changes in life. There's a change in a relationship. There's a change in location. There's a change in job. There's all of those things. Even if you want the new situation, you have to leave something behind in order to move into that. And there can be losses that you can end up losing things that are significant to you. And that was fascinating for me to realize that that was going on. I mean, I'd kind of been aware of the grief side of things. I just didn't expect it to show up in that particular context. And yeah, and when I was unpacking that, when I was at a space where I could actually talk about it, it was like the grief was around the feeling of home. And that's what I'd been looking for and had been mourning for years and years and years without realizing that's what was going on. It was fascinating because one of the things that I had noticed about myself for a while was that pretty well every January I would have a really flat month. Now, January here in Australia was school holidays. So most of January was school holidays. So it was not like it was school related. It was like this should have been a fun time. This should have been a time to sort of really enjoy. But I'd find myself really flat in January. And as I got older, I was finding that I didn't enjoy Christmas much either. And I rationalized that and said, oh, I don't like the commercialism of it. But in this experience of going to Africa, I suddenly made connections because in before I'd got to the space where I could talk about it, I was finding myself inadvertently putting on Christmas music in my car and bawling my eyes out. And I didn't know what that was about either. So this was like, I don't know if there's a connection with Africa and Christmas and so on. But again, as I was unpacking it, one of the things that I was realizing, I came to realize was that every single move that we made from when we left New Guinea until I finished high school, um, every single move had happened around Christmas time,
Mm.
except for one. And so in my mind, without even realizing it, I'd unconsciously associated Christmas with the move. So why would I celebrate Christmas? Because it was going to anticipate an upheaval of my life. And once I realized that, it was like something shifted for me. It's just like, oh, I know what that's about. I don't actually to need to hold on to that anymore. I've got control about my moving. I've got control about location. Now I can choose things, whereas as a child I didn't have that choice. I was kind of moved with the family, and acknowledging that was really significant. And it also had a ripple effect. Then January was the time that we were moving into the new location in a lot of cases. It made sense that I'd feel really flat because it's like I'm grieving what I'd left behind, and now I'm in the middle of having to get established in a new area again. And again, the acknowledgement was really important, and what it did, it helped me to settle that, resolve that for myself. So January doesn't have that feel anymore. But I didn't realize what was going on for years.
Well, that's what a lot of people don't know about grief. It's exactly what you just said, is that your brain will associate things without you being consciously aware of it, as the best way I like to describe it. So you went a lot of years of I'm really flat in January. I don't understand why. And even at Christmas, I don't seem to care about this, but I'm not really sure why. But when you give yourself that space, like you said, of acknowledgement of it, all of a sudden you go, oh, I'm consciously aware of this. We moved all the time during Christmas. I might not have gotten time to celebrate, appreciate, or be present
Mm,
for that because I had all this uprooted stuff going on. That
mm,
it just was not a holiday that I stopped and paused and celebrated like a lot of other people do. So your brain associated that with upheaval, maybe with some chaos, maybe with uncertainty, maybe I might not have Christmas this year again, even though it's there and you can have it. Your brain is in that place of like, well, we might not have this because we're gonna have this thing going on, so we got to prepare for this thing over here.
yeah,
And it's fascinating how our brains will associate through that grief process some kind of perceived pain is what I like to call it. It's a perceived pain
yep,
that may or may not be real. Depends on how,
yep,
how we process that, how we ask ourselves the
yep.
questions. But yeah, it's just interesting how our brains do that without us really being consciously aware of it.
And the whole thing about the brain being very aware of time frames is really fascinating because it's like the cycle of the seasons coming up to the Christmas season. It was just like, uh-oh, we've been here before. We know what can happen. Let's prepare for it. And
Mm.
that's an aspect of grief that is reasonably common. It's like people talk about the anniversaries of things and how you might experience stuff going on with the anniversaries of a death or an anniversary of a change. And that I found to be quite true. It's like your body knows the time of year that it was where the changes happened. And so when that time of year rolls around again, well, not often, you can experience some of the same feelings of loss and go through another round of grieving in going into that space, into that time. So there's some interesting things here about we mourn places where we lived, and we also mourn times that aren't there anymore. And so that's fascinating in itself. Just actually looking at it, it's like we attach to place, we attach to somewhere, and when we lose that somewhere, even if we go to somewhere that has some better benefits or opportunities or this, that, and the other, sometimes there's still a lingering attachment to that place that was once very important to us, and
That's
we we miss that.
That's really well said. And I didn't want to interrupt you, but you talked about this when we first jumped on the podcast, and I thought it was a really profound topic to discuss. I
Mm.
caught on to your level of detachment when you were telling your story about moving
Mm.
so many times. I caught this sense of, well, I don't want to get really attached to the school or this house or this holiday or this area or these people here, because I'm going to be gone. I'm going to move. And so,
Yep,
I can't imagine because I'll share with you. I've lived the opposite life of I've lived in the same place for
yep,
33 years of my life. I moved to the East Coast for the last 6 years, and now I just moved back to where I grew up in a similar area. And so
yep,
my experience of life is I got that kind of I'm bored living in the same area because I know
yeah,
everything. I've been everywhere. And so I
yeah,
like crave that change. But then it's been fascinating to hear your side of the story because you've got an experience I don't have, which is being uprooted all the time and moving all the time and never really being able to attach yourself to things or people for that matter because your life was always changing. And so
yeah.
I found that really a fascinating perspective that you shared.
Yes, and it's interesting because it's like the people who have grown up in the one area and have had their formative years there, they associate themselves with the place. So it's like you're a West Coaster. I dare say you'd probably even say I'm from Washington State. So and you connect yourself with that because that's what you grew up with. With a third culture kid, they're sitting there going, well, I grew up in multiple places and I've got connections to all of them. So how do I identify myself? So, and other people don't get that in a lot of cases. They're not aware that that's an issue. It's like, what do you mean you don't know where you're from? It's like, oh, like, where's your family from? Well, my family's from there, but I've never lived there.
Yeah,
And
I had the
so
same. I had the conversation with military. I worked in the mortgage business for 8 years, and I worked with veterans all over the world. And I had the opposite thing of like, well, that's really cool. You got to move around because I've been stationed in one place for 30 years. So
yeah, yeah,
I get what you say though, because I have run into those people that are like, well, what do you mean where I'm from? I was that kid that was always going, well, where have you been? What do you do? Like, where have you
yes,
visited? And I was always enthused when people said, I
yep,
went to Berlin, Germany, I went to Tokyo, Japan, I went to Victoria, Australia. I've been all over the place, and I was going, that is really cool. Like to me, it was just like this awesome thing. But I saw it in them that they, to your point, I always saw it in them saying, well, I'm just used to moving around, and I don't identify as a German. I don't identify as Japanese. I don't identify with this. I'm just me. And
yep,
so
yep.
it was just interesting to see that perspective.
Yes, and I think a lot of people that go into the military, well, I might be generalizing too much here, but people in the military often have a family background of military as well. So I would be interested to know how many people in the military who joined the military as an adult actually had a third culture kid background or a military background, because in some respects that would predispose them to like, yeah, I'm actually able to adapt to all the moving because I don't feel attached to anywhere. So, but then people like yourself, if they join the military as an adult, they've got someplace to come back to. And that's the thing that the third culture kid often doesn't have, or at least not to the degree that a person who's grown up in the one area has. So I can tell you where my hometown is. I can't. I know what town I was born in, but I don't remember that, and I don't have any strong connection to that particular place. What is a hometown? It's like, is that the place that I've lived the longest? Is that the place I felt most attached to? Is that, again, there's like all these complex questions that come with these kind of things that people who haven't walked that experience don't understand. And the
Y-
disconnect becomes really hard to work with sometimes. And so the response of the third culture kid can be, I'm going to try and blend in and be the chameleon in my current context so that nobody guesses that I'm not actually from here, which doesn't work, but we play the game anyway, because the third culture kid will give themselves away in many different ways without even intending to, because they haven't grown up in that space. There are things they don't know about how things work, and they've had a lived experience from elsewhere that intrudes into the current space, and they can't actually hide it forever. I mean, certainly
Yeah, that
they can choose not to talk about it, but it's like it makes its presence known. I mean, I constantly get people will sit there and say, "You have an accent." Doesn't matter where I am. You have an accent. It's like every place I've lived, everyone said that. You have an accent, which is like, okay, that's your first marker that you're not actually from here. So
I
there are things that you can kind of adapt, but even still, it doesn't completely solve the issue.
that's a
So
challenge. I ran into when I moved to the East Coast in the US. I know it's still in the continental United States, but I will say that life on the East Coast where I lived is radically different from the West
yeah,
Coast in so many
yep,
ways. And there's
yep,
like New Englanders over in Massachusetts and New England in general. They all have a little accent, a little dialect. Like Mass people don't pronounce R's in their words, so you'll hear them say something and you're gonna go, "What are you talking about?" Like
yeah,
it'll be kind
yeah,
of confusing, but then you also have different cultural norms over there of certain behaviors and certain things you just don't say and do. Where out here on the West
yep,
Coast, you can do those things and nobody
yep,
cares. But back there,
yep,
do's that, you're going to upset somebody. Or,
yep,
our community. I lived in a really small community in New Hampshire, really tiny, and everything shuts down at 8 o'clock. There is no nightlife.
yep,
There is no staying out
yep,
late. If you
yep,
are out late, somebody's assuming the worst, like they're up to mischief or something. So there's all these. It's been fascinating when I moved out of a place, because you talked about this too. I was taking notes when we were talking, and I think there's a level of comfort that third culture kids don't get. There is no, there's almost like you're living in complete uncertainty and not really able to say I'm comfortable. And where I was
mm,
going with this is when I moved to the East Coast, I felt like I walked into this whole other culture and I was like, whoa,
yep,
like people
yep,
talk different, they act different, their day-to-day
yep,
process is different, where we shop
yep,
is different, how when and
yep,
often we go out and eat is different.
yep,
The culture, the climate, everything's different. And I
yes,
got that sense of like, whoa, now I'm really uncomfortable. I'm really uncertain. I've got all this
yep,
stuff I've got to learn. Like you said,
yep,
blending in, for example, you've got an accent. It can make it hard to blend in because immediately people always do that thing of, oh, you have an accent. Where are you from? Uh,
yes,
and then
yes,
back to your question, and that's where you're like, well, I'm from a lot of places. What are you asking where I'm born or where I grew up
yeah,
or
yeah,
like,
yeah. Whereas for you, it would be like, where am I from? I'm originally from the West Coast, and it's pretty simple. So yeah, it's and the complexity is interesting. So the chameleon response is one end of the spectrum of the responses. The other end of the spectrum is like, okay, I'm going to embrace my difference to such a point that I'm going to be obnoxiously different. And it's like I'm going to make it very clear that I'm not from this place. So, and that can express itself in lots of different ways. Uh, yeah. So, and I found myself doing both depending upon where I was and what was going on. I mean, sometimes it would be like, yeah, I'm going to try and blend in, but then when that didn't work, then it was like, okay, well, I'm not going to blend in now. I'm going to be so completely different, and who cares what you think about that? And yeah, and that was yeah, there was this wrestle that was constantly going on about like, can I fit in? And what do I do if I can't? And what does fitting in actually mean? And so, I mean, it was, and I think for different people, that's going to mean different things. For me, one of the things that I was really craving and have continued to look for in every place that I've looked is deep connections. as a third culture kid, because we kind of expect that circumstances are going to change and you may not stay in places for long periods of time, we don't tend to um, deal with small talk well. It's like because it's like in our heads, it's like we don't know how much time we've got. Let's not mess around with trivial stuff. Let's get to the real deep stuff and get to know each other really, really well. And I mean, and that was my response. I mean, not true for every third culture kid, but that was my response to this whole idea of like this. I don't know how long I've got. So sitting there with small talk, talking about the weather, talking about what's going on in the locality was kind of like, oh, I don't know how to engage with this. When I was living in the US, one of the things that I found was that there were constantly movie references, and I'd not seen the movie, so I'm just sitting there going, I can kind of work out what you're talking about and what the reference means in the context of this conversation, but I haven't seen the movie. So I'm having people that are killing themselves laughing about some quote that they've just put out there that I don't get it. It's like, I
I am
don't,
so glad you brought that up. That is that's an
yeah,
American culture thing that there's certain movies that are, I forget what they
they're like,
call them.
they're
Uh,
iconic type of movies.
cult
Yes.
they're cult movies. That's what they call them. Cult movies in the sense of it's been in the culture for so long that
Yep.
it's like assumed that you know those things. And I've run into that too when I talk to people that are British, by the way. They bring up certain shows, and I for some reason, as an American, I don't understand the British comedy for whatever reason. It says it's like off to me or something. But at the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
time, what's really funny is when I tell them things about American movies, they don't get it half the time. And so I find it interesting that our different cultures put us in that place of not understanding each other. But
Yes.
it makes a
And
difference.
not
Um,
having reference points, not having common reference points is challenging because it's like,
it is.
okay, you're talking about something that means something to you and means nothing to me. And do I actually let you know how little I understand what's going on, or or do I pretend that I know? I just sort of nod and smile, smile, nod, smile and wave, boy, smile and wave type of thing.
Yeah.
Give you reference right there. So,
Well, Neville, I wanted to ask you because you brought up, oh man, I hope I didn't forget this question, but you brought up the idea of being a chameleon to fit into these cultural norms, if you will. And I wanted to ask you, was there a degree that you felt comfortable being your authentic self, just who Neville is and not having to put a mask on? Or did you feel like you had to hide certain parts of who you were to blend into that culture?
as a child, I definitely felt that I think I was pretty well my authentic self until we moved to Australia, and then that was preteen, like coming into the teen years, and peer approval was huge. It is huge for teenagers. So at that point, the mask developed. So I need to be something other than myself because I didn't think that people would accept the person that I was and where I'd come from. So, and finding friends was a really big deal. And so it was just like, well, okay, I will present this face in this context in the hopes that this will actually allow me to be accepted in a particular group. Um, and that continued, like when I went to university, that started to get challenged. And I was also asking questions of myself, like, who actually am I? Now that I've gone to university, I'm no longer living with my family. Like, who am I? And there was some massive grief there around the realization that my family and I were going in separate directions. And my family
Mm.
had been the most stable thing in my life up to the point that I went to university. So that was a really big thing to work through was the where is my stability if it's not in my family anymore? So yeah, so it was the mask wearing kind of it was second nature in some respects, but at the same time there was like I want somebody to actually know the real me, and I don't know how to find safe spaces to do that. And that kind of I found some people that I could do that to a degree with over time. But my journey was that I had to get more comfortable with myself. I had to get to a point of accepting that my life has gone this way. It's different from a lot of people that I connect with, and that doesn't mean that there's going to be automatic rejection. So it was coming to terms with my own difference and coming to accept that I'm okay as the person I am. I've got this background, this history, this backstory um, that has shaped me in particular ways that have brought me into places that I couldn't have guessed when I was a child, and and it's valuable. And if other people don't value that, that's their loss. So
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because my childhood, I got ostracized a lot for not fitting in and conforming to the norm of what everybody thinks and believes and sees and does. And I went through that identity crisis myself of trying to figure out who the heck am I?
yeah,
And I've went through that losing my kid 2 years ago too, same thing. But to your point though, I was excited when I started meeting people of various backgrounds and just
yes,
different walks of life. I mean, I met people that I have a friend, for example, I grew up sailing with here in Seattle, Washington. He lives in New Zealand. He left the country probably 20 years ago now, and he's
yep,
never
yep,
come back. And he said, I love it down here. And he said, I'm not from New Zealand, but I love it down here. I love the people. I love the culture. I love everything about this. I had military friends that lived in 6 or 8 different countries, and I was always getting enthused by, well, you have all these different experiences than I do. You
yep,
didn't stay in the same place as I did. You
yep,
didn't, maybe you didn't get into sailing like I did, but you took off and did hiking or you did some kind of other activity overseas. And I always got this open mind thing that's it's got me in
yep,
trouble over the years with people that just are trapped in a one set block. But I love people of different backgrounds and different varieties of life because the beauty of this life is that if we were all the same person, this world would be boring. We would
yep,
get tired of ourselves. And so
yep,
it's like when I met you and you said, I lived in Papua New Guinea, I lived in Australia, I lived in the UK, I lived on the East Coast for a minute, and I was going, whoa, that is cool. To me, it was exciting because I was like, I've never moved across the world like that before. And for you to experience so many different cultures, so many different backgrounds, so many different types of personalities, and to end up where you are and who you are today, honestly, I don't think I would change it. Honestly, you have a hell of a story that most people don't have and aren't going to get,
yep,
and you have so much to
yep,
offer.
yep, absolutely. And there's a process of coming to accept that. And so some of that is about identifying the pain points in the journey because uprooting is hard and you lose things in the process. So being able to recognize that that is part of the process is important, not rather than just pretending that you're doing okay, realizing that, hey, make some space the for recognizing what it is that you're going to leave behind as you move into this new space, and honoring that is really
I think
quite important.
that's I think that's very important because we always look at what we're lacking in life and we don't
Yep.
always see what we've got and what we've gained.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
where I think a lot of people, I try to show them that even in the worst parts of grief, by the way, there's always a gift and a lesson and a blessing in it. There always is. And it's just a matter of whether we want to see it or not. And I love that you shared today, by the way, when you broke that mask off and asked yourself that question, because I don't think enough people do. What Neville said, it was very powerful a few minutes ago, by the way. Who am I? That's a great, great question to ask. Who are you? Because we identify ourselves so much with titles and names of things, and we associate ourselves with movies we watched and where we've lived for 30 years. And sometimes that can be good to a degree, but sometimes it's not actually who you are. It's just
Yeah.
identifying with your surroundings. And when you're brave enough
Yep.
to ask that question, like Neville did on this podcast, saying, I had to ask myself, who am I? When you get down to that level of yourself, there's a big acceptance factor there to
Mm.
say, I have a diverse background. I've done things most people don't do, and I've had a good experience with it for the most part. It was hard at certain times. I had to leave things behind. I had a lot of uncertainty. I didn't have a lot of comfort with things, and I also had identity crisis trying to figure out who I am. But it was through those experiences that shaped and molded me into who I am today, and I look at the beautiful person I've become, regardless of what anybody walking this planet says. That's a beautiful thing.
It is, and it's an interesting thing because of the variety of experiences that I've had. I can connect with people on so many different levels, and that's the beauty of the work that I do, is that I can actually identify not, not exactly with what somebody is going through, but I understand what those transitions actually can do and how they can be a mix of things. There can be some really good things and some really difficult things, and losses that go on with that, and also hope and looking forward into into a new future. So one of the things I wrote an article in during COVID. I met another third culture kid, which I think we the third culture kids seem to attract them in some ways. You sort of find out it's like we know, and then it's just like yeah, this person challenged me to have a look at a TED talk by a fellow called Pico Ayer, and he does this poignant TED talk on like where is home, and he's a third culture kid, and he talks about like home is not a piece of soil. So how do I then find home? And that really challenged me to go and process a little bit further my experience as a third culture kid, and what had been my journey, or and what is my ongoing journey of finding home. And that what came out of that for me was that I get to choose where home is. It's not about the circumstances around me, it's about where I choose to be. And that was very, very powerful for me. It's like, it's not about where I grew up, it's not about my background and my past, although that's shaped me. Um, Home is where I choose to be. And that I think sometimes when we go through challenging transition like relocation, it's very tempting to sit there and look into the future and say, when I get there, that will be home. And especially if you've had an experience like mine where you've lost a sense of home, and it's like, well, okay, where is home now? How do I find home, and where do I fit in that? The acceptance of self is one part of it. The other part of it is really very much about like I am where I am, and I'm going to make the best of it. And I will make this home for as long as I'm here. And the,
You're you're
the
making me
third part,
reflect on you're making me reflect on my life last year because I left New England and it was a very rough time for me. But certain family members I talked to, I always called my home in New Hampshire home the last 6 years. And
yep,
it actually felt like home. You're triggering my thoughts right now.
yeah,
And they said, but you grew up in Seattle, Washington. You grew up on the West Coast. Like that's home. And I said, no, not really to me. I said I grew up there. I said I don't really
yep,
identify with that.
yep,
And I got asked like why, and I said, well, I bought my first home in New Hampshire. I had 5 acres. I had woods. I had animals. I had all this. I had my own business. I had all my own stuff going on. I created it my own way. I didn't have anybody else helping me with it. My wife and
yep,
I started our family there. I said that's where I identified home was because of all those things that were there, not because of the place necessarily, but because of what I did. So
yes.
I appreciate you
And
sharing what you just did.
yeah, it's like home is something that we build. It's not just someplace that we are.
Mm,
Mm.
that's
And so,
powerful.
and so when you build something and you have to leave it behind, you've invested a lot of yourself in it. And
That's what makes it hard.
it hurts. It hurts because it's like I've invested my soul into building this thing, this home, this place. And while I might be able to create something else, it won't be this. And the getting to the point of accepting that this was this phase of life and this was the beauty of this phase of life, and there is beauty still over here in this new phase of life is a process, because as you're letting go of this where you've been, it allows you then to embrace where you are a little bit more.
That's really powerful. I want to ask you another question that came up in my head from what we've been talking about today. Do you feel, as a third culture kid, that your ability to adapt and be flexible to life's changes, is a positive for you, or do you see it as a negative in life?
Um, I'm going to change the question a little bit because it's like the adaptability for a third culture kid is something that they have to learn because things change so much. It's not something that they choose to do, and they learn how to do it, but they don't necessarily like it. So it's like, okay, I can adapt. I know what's involved with that, but sometimes there is a little bit of a sense of like, why do I have to do this again? And it's interesting for me. My wife and I relocated down to where we are now from Brisbane. We'd been for, well, I mean, I'd been there for a total of 15 years with the break in the middle, and she'd been there, I think, a little bit longer than that. Um, and the relocation for me was very much about I need to I need to adapt down here, but I also need to acknowledge what I have. And I can't guarantee that what I have here in Brisbane is going to be there in the new location at all. So how do I mourn that? I mean, we had a unit that my wife had bought that we were living in together. It was our first house as a married couple. Um, I'd started my business up there, and it was just kind of like, yeah, I'm hearing what you were saying about the building stuff, and this was there. There was a sense of I was finally putting down roots, and now I was uprooting, and there was some difficulty around that, even though it was something that we felt it was the right thing for us to do, and we wanted to do it. Letting go of the network of relationships and the locality that we lived in and the opportunities that we could access in Brisbane, um, that needed some time. And sometimes the adaptability, people can rush too quickly into adapting into the new context. I know for my family, the overwhelming sense that I had in my childhood through that upheaval time was that we've just got to get through this and get settled. And we didn't know to ask the question or to even explore, like, how are we feeling about what we've left behind? It was just like, well, we've got to move. Let's get ourselves prepared to move, and then let's see how quickly we can settle into the new place. And that got hard because you've got this accumulation of griefs that are unacknowledged, that are sitting there kind of building perceptions in your head that we're just going to move again, so why should I bother?
That's what I was wondering, and I'm reflecting. I was trying to ask that question. You did a great job answering that, by the way. But I was really wondering about how that played into a role in your life because adaptability was something that you just had to do. You almost got forced into it. You didn't really have a choice to say, "Well, I don't really want to do that today," or "I don't really want to do that this year." It was, "Well, I just kind of have to, so I'm just going to do this anyway."
Here it is
But like
again. Yeah.
but like you said, you end up with grief every time that's forced. And so
I
I
think
guess that's
you end
probably
up
my question with that is it's forced versus natural at that point.
I think even if it's something that you choose, there is still an element of grief with that. And in both cases, a lot of people don't recognize the grief that's involved. They sit there and go, "Well, this is something that I wanted. Why should I be grieving anything?" And it's like we grieve the things that we love. And when you move from one situation to another situation, no matter how small or big that is, there is an element of like your world is shifting. Your world is shifting. Things are not the same as you've been used to. And some things get left behind in the process. And it's those unacknowledged things that get left behind that can sometimes do us in and make it difficult to then settle in the next place. So the third culture kid, challenge is that because they're used to moving, they sit there and say, I'm not comfortable here, I'm not feeling settled, I'll just go somewhere else and it will be better.
Mm. But you might end up chasing and for lack of a better term, chasing something, trying to find that when
Absolutely.
it may be where it may be where you're at now. Just giving yourself the time and patience to understand where you're at and what might be comfortable for you.
Yep. And I mean, I look at my own journey of going overseas as an adult as a bit of I needed to find out where home was. I wanted to be somewhere where I felt like I wasn't the stranger, I wasn't the foreigner, that I was actually accepted. And um, and that was a bit of an elusive quest. So I mean, here I am. I leave Australia. I go to the UK. Didn't not even being sure that I would ever go back to Australia. UK, difficult experience. I moved on to the US. Thought that okay, this is going to give me an opportunity to then move back to Europe. That didn't happen. I ended up in the US a lot longer than I thought I was going to be, and struggled with that because it was like this was not my plan. So I'm grieving the plan that I had that isn't materializing. And then I have the realization that I need to go back to Australia for myself rather than because I have to. It's like I need to go back to Australia for me, and had the opportunities for study. And then I had to relinquish the networks and the experiences that I'd had in the US and give people the opportunity to say goodbye because I really just wanted to disappear. So yeah, it was very interesting for me actually navigating that because I had people that were sitting there saying when they knew that I was planning to move, planning to leave the US, they were going, "Oh, do you want to have a party?" And I was going, "Ugh." I couldn't think of anything first. But I realized that for them, that was important for them, and I didn't realize that I needed it too. It gave not necessarily closure, but it actually alerted me to the people who actually valued me in that time that I'd been in the US. And that was something that I'd always been a bit unsure about. So, but it was interesting. Relationships shift when you have distance involved, and the people that and quite a lot of the people that came to that party, I'm no longer in contact with. It's just like time goes by and our lives go in different ways, and some people are good communicators, some people are not, and some people are quite happy to just let things drift.
Uh,
And I got to a point where I don't have the emotional energy to sit there and maintain all of these long distance relationships. It's stopping me from being here. And it's also very, very hard when I feel like I'm the one who's initiating most of the contact. And it was getting this mixed message around we think you're valuable, but not valuable enough to stay in touch with.
Yeah,
And
that's definitely something that's kind of an American thing. I've noticed that
it's not
in
just
my culture, it's
it's not just American. It happens everywhere. And I think what the coming to it to realize that when you're like absence doesn't necessarily make the heart grow fonder. Absence actually reduces the amount of shared experience. And for some people, when there's no physical presence in your life, there is no space anymore. And that was a hard thing to learn. I had some friends that I basically had to let go and just sort of like, look, I'm expecting too much of you. I'm asking you for things that you were not prepared to give, or that you didn't realize that I needed, and I didn't know that I needed that. And yeah, so it was just the whole process. There was a grieving there about this was a friendship that was meaningful to me in this context. Now that I'm no longer in this context, something's shifted. It's not the same, and I'm really sad because there was something that we had, a friendship, or something that was really important to me at the time, that hasn't translated into the new context. And yeah, that was actually really hard, but it also alerted me to the fact that I held huge amounts of unspoken expectations about people that, and then I'd be constantly disappointed because
I
they
think
wouldn't follow through.
That's a big one too. I'm glad you brought that up, and we can wrap up the podcast on that topic is expectations with other people. That's something that I've recently in the last 5 years come to realize and reflect upon in relationships because when you move across country or you move cross, wherever it may be, wherever you move, like you said, relationships sometimes stay together, some of them fall apart, and I've had to realize that there's going to be people in your life that stay that it doesn't take a lot of effort to. You guys both show up to the table with that same amount of energy to maintain something, but there's relationships sometimes that either end up in a one-sided situation where one person's giving more than the other, and it makes you kind of question things a lot. I've been in that boat a lot where I've said, well, are
Mm.
we have this friendship we still had before, or is this just kind of we're going separate ways? And I try to use the phrase that people either stay in your life for a reason or a season. And I don't mean that to say people are bad because I don't believe that. I believe that
Yeah,
life just goes different ways, and that's okay, by the
totally.
way. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
My friend that I grew up with moved to New Zealand. I haven't seen him since high school, and he's happy though. He's got a family. He's on a sailboat. He loves his life, and I'm very happy for him. I haven't talked to him, but I'm very happy for him. I'm sad I don't
yep,
get to talk to him, but
yep,
you can still be happy for him. And I'm living my life doing my thing, and so.
yep,
Um,
yep.
I always say, hopefully, at one point we'll cross paths again. And
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, keeping the openness there for reconnection is important, and sometimes the likelihood of that is quite small, and that's just the way life is sometimes. And yeah, sort of that's been an interesting part of my journey. I mean, you mentioned that the reason, the season, the pithy saying is like some people are in your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. I think I was wanting every relationship to be lifetime relationships, and it was just like, yeah, that's not going to work. And
well,
the
it's
the
you.
the whole the whole transitioning, the third culture kid experience of being around different places, it was almost like I'm hanging on to the relationships because they connect me to some part of my life that no longer exists. And coming to a place of realizing I don't have to do that, it was quite significant.
Well, I think it's powerful what you just said is being able to realize that I use it in the phrase of coaching I learned from Tony Robbins. You've taken everything from that moment that it had to give for you, but this new chapter of life is asking you to let go. And it's not telling you to, that does not mean get over it, move on like nothing happened. That's the opposite of what I'm saying today, but to look back and have gratitude and appreciation for what that relationship either gave you or taught you in life. And when you look back, you instead of saying, "Wow, that went sideways," saying instead, "I'm really glad I had that person for that chapter of my life, and I really
Yep,
learned a lot, or we had a good
yep,
friendship, or whatever you want to call it."
yep,
Just say that I appreciate what was there, and it's not there anymore, and that's okay. But
mhm,
giving yourself the release and the permission is where I'm going with this to
yeah,
know that you can find that same thing somewhere else. And it's like some of my friends that I met through podcasting want me to move to Australia, and that would be a big, scary, I'm not sure I'm capable of that big change on my own kind of thing, because I've got a wife and all sorts of fun stuff going on. But I know that if I had to, for whatever reason, if I had to move to Australia tomorrow, and yes, it would be very uncomfortable and it'd be starting all over again. But I know at the same time, I said, if I didn't have the relationships I have here, they might still stay there. They might not be there when I move. That's fine, but I'll meet new people, and those new people I meet will give me a whole different array of experiences, a whole different connection level of things. I'll learn a new culture, I'll learn a new dialect, I'll have new opportunities. And so, it's always this mixed feeling of grief that we experience when we've got to make these life changes, because like you said throughout this podcast, making these big changes is letting go of something to make room for what can be. And that's that grief that stretches itself out
mm,
as we process those changes.
yep, yep, yep. I totally hear you. Yep.
So, well, Neville, I just want to say this has been an awesome episode to record with you, my friend. Like I said, I've never heard of the third culture kid perspective of life. And so I'm very, very grateful that you shared a topic that I myself didn't know very little about. And also probably people that are listening to this weren't very aware of. But I'm glad you shared your story and your perspective of life and how you came to learn about that in the first place and giving homage to your journey, because I think that despite having to be in that place of moving all the time, the upheaval you went through, you're a beautiful person and you got a great story to tell in life that's helping helping other people navigate that same journey. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, and appreciate you having the opportunity to share it here.
Well, I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Neville and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Neville's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empoweredgriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. You're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.